Hey there, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today it's a big one, the newest project from James McMurtry, The Black Dog and the Wandering Boy. So it tends to go without saying, how a critic might evaluate an album or promote it tends not to correlate with the touring reality or popularity of an artist, especially an older act who might wind up influential, but only to those in the know. And while if you knew James McMurtry's fearsome pedigree as a songwriter and poet, you would make the time to see him live. I did a couple years ago, albeit in a smaller venue. He is excellent. In recent years, some younger acts inspired by him have taken him on tour, most notably Jason Isbell. Now, as somebody who thinks James McMurtry deserves a bigger stage, that absolutely rules. I love to see it. And given some level of critical reevaluation of McMurtry's catalog's also happening, folks are going back, I was extremely excited for his newest album, reportedly inspired in some way by his fear of the words not coming, of irrelevance. The albums are more fuel for his near constant road presence than the other way around, no matter where those words might take him. And he also brought in a pretty rich cast of supporting musicians, including Sarah Jarosz, a very nice surprise as someone who got into her last year, and reunited with the legendary producer Don Dixon, who is probably best known for 1980s REM, and who produced McMurtry's 1995 album Where Do You Hide the Body in order to amplify this burlier, smoldering groove. So again, I was going in with very high expectations. Does he deliver? Well, let me put it like this. The album is great, that's not surprising, but it should be fantastic, and it's kind of tied to a singular issue that I really can't ignore. If you can listen past it, or you only care about the live experience, you're getting that top quality songwriting with some of the most colorful and flavorful southern rock-infused mixes that McMurtry's had in years. But once I heard that issue, I couldn't stop hearing it, and it was a distraction away with what could have been one of my absolute favorite albums of 2025. So okay, let's get it out of the way. First, get it out of the way now, the mixing and mastering of this project, specifically around the vocals and harmonica and some of the heavier guitar and bass tones, it's mic'd so close that some of the mid to high frequencies start blowing out the mix and it got actively distracting. Now, all the instruments, acoustic or electric, they sound louder and sharper across this mix, the natural extension of some of the rougher mixing choices from the Horses and the Hounds in 2021 that I mentioned at the time. And given that we're also dealing with long-running industry veterans decades into their careers, and not something that Dixon brought in production 30 years ago, it's got to be intentional. Intensify a certain ragged urgency that's intended to feel a little bit more lo-fi, maybe reminiscent of a live recording. But it's also not like the arrangements have any other elements that would feel this slapdash or rough around the edges to accentuate the choice, especially given the longer list of session musicians to punch up the banjo or strings or organ for an even richer sonic palette. So it becomes this baffling mix choice that lingers across the entire album, and it draws attention away from McMurtry's vocal line and words, where I was switching out streaming services and headphones to try to configure the best possible version with little actual success. Now, if you can get past that, or the choice to bookend the album with two covers, the last of which is a pretty good Chris Christopherson song, but never my favorite choice to leave your strongest note coming forward on a cover. But yeah, the songs themselves are really goddamn strong, as to be expected. James McMurtry remembering the lesson that great southern rock is carried on those killer bass lines, it's absolutely present here, with cuts like South Texas Lawman, the title track, especially The Color of Night, and when he steps back for more acoustic ballads like Pinocchio In Vegas, opposite a lot of the cellos there, or the brittle banjo and strings across Sons of the Second Sons and Annie, in the former case with this rattling drumline snare, and the latter with that deep, booming drum accentuating the gravity of the collapsing situation. The compositions, they cut through all of my mixing gripes. They're great songs. I can't quite say the same about the bluesy yet oddly tinny Back to Coeur d'Alene, especially with some of those odd vocal effects, or the feminine vocals that aren't quite as well blended as you would hope for on Sailing Away. And if I'm going to be comparing his cover of Broken Freedom song with Chris Christopherson's softer Melancholy from 1974, I personally don't think it lands quite as well, but that's ultimately nitpicking compared to the major mixing issues. But that also takes us to the reason why you want to give this a proper chance anyway: songwriting and themes. For as much as James McMurtry has accentuated his own fears of age and irrelevance, underscoring these stories, the wry frankness in which he approaches them might temper some of that darkness, but doesn't let it overpower them. The sort of wide-angle shots granted to aging folks who are, at the end of the day, as human as all of us in their breakdowns, with the dare coming for empathy to what might feel kind of inexplicable to your own experience, or some rather unsympathetic characters. The most arch and high concept is the album standout Pinocchio in Vegas, taking the weathered puppet made real boy through the death of Geppetto, the father figure, and an embittering world where he is daring you to punch back, but all you might be left with is pity, which you also see extended to the dishonorably discharged cop on Southern Texas Lawman, who is a messy relic and a broken man of a different time, and is left on a beach contemplating, his own ending. But it goes beyond such smaller stories, or indeed autobiography, nor his adrift road musings of The Color of Night and Sailing Away feel very pointed to his own experience. There's also the contemplation of legacy on a nationwide scale. Annie is very explicitly about striving for smaller familial connections amidst the fires of 9/11, a conflict that the protagonist can barely understand but can see all the contradictions in George Bush leading the United States to war, and that same self-serious and self-important striving for legacy, it burns throughout Sons of the Second Sons, painting the United States as founded by strivers and endless optimists to fill the void within, attempt to paper over a darker legacy than they ever want to properly admit. McMurtry's always been political, but this is less of highlighting the sickness at the roots of America and more of the sad and very human pattern of rebels papering over their less than moral roots of rebellion, and at the end find themselves looking for another Caesar and the loss of any sort of collective consciousness. It makes a lot of sense as to why he ends the album on Broken Freedom Song, featuring the forgotten soldier, the woman, maybe even Jesus Christ himself, yearning to have any of that empathy in a song of freedom that nobody's quite singing anymore. Nobody's missing till you need them. And yet, for as tragically real as the observation might be, there is still a trace of humor in how McMurtry's gonna frame these stories. It's most encapsulated in the title track, where McMurtry references an old picture drawn of him by a friend of his father and countercultural figure Ken Kesey. The lyrics referencing a black dog and wandering child that his father, Larry McMurtry, described in the throes of dementia. But despite the surrealism of the scene, where they don't vanish with medication, because on some level they're real enough, either through memory or autobiography, his father recognizes that neither are quite harming anyone, even if he can't explain them, and it's better to embrace them as an inexplicable and fallible part of himself than grind through workaday drudgery, referencing, of all things, Weird Al Yankovic's Another One Rides the Bus, a parody of Queen's Another One Bites the Dust, which has its own sharp legacy of goading defiance. And that all circles back to that artistic process, because for as much as it feels like all the tours become a blur that leave James McMurtry further disconnected from people and his home and his family, he is forging that collective connection through art that enables his begrudging wry peace with any darkness that is to come. When we lose that connection and we lose the people, does the fear really take over? But in short, man, it's a frustrating album to untangle because the writing and the compositions are as strong and compelling as ever, maybe even holding together better than one might expect, stuff full of the wide-framing, sly humor and knotted meta-commentary that makes James McMurtry such a thrilling poet, makes him so goddamn special. And yet, at least for me, the production is distracting enough to keep it from clicking as deeply or as sharply. Admittedly, the more listens I gave it, the more I could look past it, call it the scaring the hose paradigm. So maybe after far more repeated listens over the summer, it's gonna notch a higher spot. But as it is, the recording keeps it away from McMurtry's top tier, at least for me. As always, he's gonna get the highest of my recommendations. I love this guy. The songwriting is legit that great all the way down, but it's not the easiest of jump on points, it's rougher around the edges, and said recommendation is a little bit more cautious. Although, funny thing, with more listens, the Black Dog and the Wandering Child gets more familiar and more comfortable, if inexplicable. If that sort of parallel and ironic metatext ain't worth appreciating, I don't know what is. So that's your incentive. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. I'm genuinely curious where folks are going to fall on this. I know that I'm pretty much the only one who's bothering to cover James McMurtry on YouTube, especially at his age. But yeah, this is indeed really great. I think he's one of the best writers, even like singer-songwriters outside of his genre working, and the fact he's still working is kind of miraculous. And yeah, the poetry is indeed that good. The album is going to get recommended. Where it might fall in his larger catalog, well, comments are down there. Enjoy the debate. Have fun. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if y'all want to get involved in getting projects on my schedule when it reopens in July, yell at me on my Discord, or just support the channel, link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships are right over there. Don't feel obligated, tough times, I understand, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.